So I'm Mary Riley, and welcome, and thank you for coming. I know the conditions are less than ideal to come out tonight, so thank you. It's Michelle Mraz and Charles Simpson and myself tonight, and Michelle and I are going to be co-moderating. I just want to make a couple announcements before we start. In the past, we've always approved the minutes, and we thought that it seemed kind of silly, given that most people didn't have an opportunity to view them until the very meeting, like 1 minute beforehand. So we thought what we would do instead is just note that we have the minutes out, they're available for reading. They're also, there's a link onto the website to look at the meeting minutes, as well as when Matt puts out on the Front Porch Forum, when he puts out the agenda, there's a link as well that'll take you to the minutes. And then if for some reason you still aren't able to get a copy of the minutes, just let me know and I'll make sure you get a copy. Okay, so first up tonight, we have the candidates forum for South District City Council. And how we're gonna run this is similar to candidates night in the past, where we allot a certain number of time to each candidate. And so tonight we'll do 5 minutes for each candidate, and then we'll have 20 minutes for questions. And each candidate can have an opportunity to answer the question if you want to. And then also, we're gonna just be holding up a little sign saying 1 minute to help you all just determine that there's 1 minute left, so that each candidate will have a full opportunity to say what they want to say. So, okay, I see Mohammed. So the forum, we'll do it up here. If you want to come on up, Joan, Mohammed, and I don't see Paco. You're right there. Okay, so the three of you, if you want to come up, and then if you, the audience members, when it comes time to ask questions, if you don't mind just using this microphone, I guess I'll turn it this way. So the microphone is for the video. And one more announcement, just so you know, ideally next month we'll be live streaming, so something to look forward to. So anyway, so we have Joan Shannon, Mohammed Jafar, and Paco DeFrancis. So welcome. Welcome. Hi. So Joan, do you want to go first, or I don't know which one of you wants to go?
Sure.
Okay.
Do we have a timing system, or?
Yeah, we will.
Because I don't actually have any idea how.
Yeah, we're timing, and then we'll hold up a 1 minute sign when you're done. When you have 1 minute left, we'll hold up a 1 minute sign.
Okay.
That's it. I'll hold it up.
All right. Thanks. Okay, that doesn't amplify, so I won't worry about it. Hi, I think I know most of you. I'm Joan Shannon, and I have been the South District City Councilor for a couple terms, and before that, I was a Ward 5 City Councilor. My top priority is, and always has been, to serve all of you, my constituents, to the best of my ability. That means listening to your input, seeking to understand all sides of disagreement before making a decision, and then coming back to you and explaining why I voted the way I voted. Over the years, I have had the opportunity and privilege to move forward many issues that were brought to me by my constituents. Many of you are aware of my work at the beginning of my term on the City Council on the smoking issue. This was first raised at an NPA meeting, and the NPA, there was a motion that was passed to ban smoking in bars and clubs. And at the time, that was an outrageous idea. The advocates for the idea had knocked on every door in the legislature and the mayor's office and gotten nowhere. And a new city councilor brought forward this idea, which then got the state to ban smoking in bars and clubs. From there, we banned smoking in parks, and most recently, we banned smoking on the Church Street Marketplace. Another issue that was raised by Burlington residents and business people was a zoning in the Pine Street Enterprise Zone. When we were doing the zoning rewrite, a group of business people came to me and they said, Joan, you know, there's a lot of things that are not allowed in this district. And I sat down with them and understood, went through the entire use table and really dove into why are we allowing or disallowing different uses. And through that process, we changed the zoning so that we could have offices in the enterprise zone, which were previously not allowed. We could have cafes, which would serve people working in offices and industry and factories and everybody who is there, as well as the residents. Even dance studios were not allowed in the enterprise zone. So there have been a lot of changes, and I think people recognize those changes, but don't necessarily know why they happened, but that's why they happened. I'm an advocate for the environment and was thrilled to be able to help move our Burlington Wildways project forward in the last couple of years. This was an initiative by one of our Conservation Board members, Zoe Richards. This project will conserve, connect, and provide equitable access to our city's natural areas. 50% of our city is open space, and 25% of that open space is in a natural state. The lack of signage and access to this open space is a justice issue. Those with more means can hop in a car and have an experience with nature. We want all Burlingtonians to have this access to wild places, and that is what this project seeks to achieve. I will give a special shout out to Richard Dean on this issue, who, after the passage of our resolution, really shepherded the project and brought it to reality. And then there are very localized issues, like changing the zoning to allow city market, while at the same time minimizing the impacts on neighbors. Most people in the South End thought it was a great idea to bring city market in. I would say the exception would be a lot of people who were going to live right next to that and experience the traffic. I worked with Public Works, fellow councilor Chip Mason, and the neighbors, and probably about 15 or more neighbors participated in that process. And City Market was redesigned. They redesigned their access so that it would have less impact in the neighborhood. And it has an impact still, but that was a concession, and the neighbors appreciated the effort, and the project was made better for that participation of bringing everybody to the table. I got a few other things, but I'll start wrapping up. My values are the environment. We need to fight climate change, improve air quality, and make Burlington a walkable, bikeable city. Foster economic and cultural diversity. I don't want to see Burlington become a boutique community, but rather want to do all that we can to create an economically and culturally diverse community with affordable housing and livable wage jobs. I believe in historic preservation. I want to save Memorial Auditorium, but recognize, too, that we have to provide the residents with an option that they can afford. My only priority is to serve you, all of you who live here in the South District, and to make your lives better and provide opportunities for everyone to have an impact in making Burlington the city we collectively believe it should be. Thank you.
Thank you, John. Thank you. Paco, do you want to go next?
Yep. Yes. Sure. So I'm Paco DeFrancis, first-time candidate, living in Ward 5. Lived there a couple of years now. Since moving to Burlington after college, or just a few other things I did in between. So I'm running primarily because of the, to improve the business climate. I'm running to try to attract more growth. I'm running because I think property taxes are an issue in Burlington. They need to be addressed, and I have a plan to lower property taxes by 10 cents. So that's about a 13% decrease from the municipal rate. Obviously, we can't touch the education rate. So a little bit about me. So I grew up down in Norwich, which is in the Upper Valley, right in the border with Havre, New Hampshire. In that area, it's a little bit different than the rest of Vermont, and that's a lot more Boston-centric than, say, maybe other parts of Vermont. They're closer, more northern Vermont, which are more Burlington-centric. It's a lot more Boston-centric. So it gives you a different perspective living down there, especially being on the border of New Hampshire, which is the fastest-growing state in the Northeast. So grew up there, then went to Colby College in Maine, studied economics and geology, graduated in 2015, and then after that, for about 9 months, I ski raced at Colby, and so it's the same conference that UVM, Middlebury, Dartmouth. There's only one conference in New England. So ski raced there, and then I moved out to Montana for a couple of months, and dabbled in professional skiing. Kind of chased the dream. Wasn't for me, so knew it wasn't just gonna be grinding my teeth out there. So then I moved to Burlington. I got a job at Keurig Green, or then Keurig Green Mountain, as kind of in the finance and analytics area. That's kind of, and I've been there ever since then. And from that, I've kind of seen a trend of divestment from major corporations that can really provides that level of economic, baseline to a community, to a whole county. So we used to have a big headquarters in South Burlington, and starting about 2014, that we were a Fortune 500 company, and we shifted our headquarters to Massachusetts just because the business climate in Massachusetts and Metro Boston was so much more favorable than it is here in Chittenden County. So I've seen that. I've seen that firsthand. I've also, I did a lot of projects up in Montreal, and I know how important that the connection with Quebec trade is to our economy, and really promoting that, and really promoting very kind of that open border, and had a nexus, and just that trade between Quebec and Vermont is how important that is to Burlington. And now I go down to Texas a lot. We just merged with a company in Texas. And I understand how important it is to have those good connections with American domestic economic hubs. And you kind of see this, and it's really challenging to grow good high-paying jobs in Burlington, and in Vermont in general, but Burlington too. And I think there are policy solutions that can address those, make it both more affordable for residents and for people, as well as for businesses, in a way that we'd be able to better attract our young graduates, high skilled graduates from both from local colleges, from Champlain, UVM, but also maybe kids who grew up in Vermont and went to college out of state like myself, as well as kids who didn't grow up in Vermont and also went to college out of state, and we can kind of attract them to kind of create a more vibrant economy, a more vibrant workforce, labor force, and a more nimble workforce, so that that'll allow companies to have more interest in investing here. So kind of how I plan to do that, and some of the policy points is we have to Burlington has to be more the quality of life. We have to really improve the quality of life. Part of that is bike lanes. I've seen right here on St. Paul Street. It's in St. Paul, and then turns into Shelburne Road. We really need protected bike lanes on St. Paul Street and on Shelburne Road. And yes, that's going to require removing some of the street parking. But we have to make that decision. We have to stand up to, be willing to remove some of that street parking so we can install a protected, separate bike lane, because that will really raise the quality of life. And then protectionist zoning. We have a lot of, Joan was talking about the enterprise district. I want to allow housing in the enterprise district, because we could build the private sector could build thousands of units of housing in the enterprise district, and that would go a long ways of reducing the overall cost of housing when we inject that much supply.
Thank you, Papa. Thank you.
If you could excuse me, I don't want to interrupt Mohammed coughing. If I could just get some water.
Sure. Mohammed?
Awesome.
Take the microphone.
Oh yeah.
Hello and good evening, everyone. First of all, thank you all for being out here this evening. I appreciate it, as I'm sure Paco and Councilor Joan do as well. So my name is Mohammed Jafar. Again, I grew up here. I'm originally actually from Kenya. I was born in Kenya in a refugee camp that the United Nations has, which used to have 20,000 people, and I'm sure has probably tripled at this point. My parents actually are originally from Somalia, and they fled war in Somalia, civil strife, and ended up in Kenya, where I was born. And I came here when I was about 7 years old, so just when I started going to school. Even as a 7-year-old, I came here with 3 younger siblings. My family has grown since. I have 11. There's 11 of us, sorry. I have 10 younger siblings now. Coming to America was a lot different. You can say snow was a little bit different. I struggled to get into snow and figure it out. I still haven't figured it out, so I'm trying. But I grew up here. Again, I went to Champlain Elementary School, Edmonds Middle School, Burlington High School, graduated in 2014. left for college, but I went right next door so I could come back. I went to New Hampshire, a small private school known as Kobe Sawyer College. Studied psychology and history and political science. Came back. I actually committed to a grad school program out in Chicago for a forensic and legal psychology program, and I was here for about 7 months waiting for that program, and I realized that there were a lot of issues that I saw growing up when I first came to the United States that still persisted. Issues that, honestly, I think our city could do a lot better about. Issues that I think our city could address a lot more aggressively, and things that I really hope that I can help to mitigate. Housing, unaffordable housing is one of the biggest issues, an issue that honestly to this day haunts my family and has made a lot of nights difficult for my parents and many other families around our city, as I'm sure. Another big issue for me is homelessness. We have people sleeping outside in sub-degree weather. There's people sleeping in the woods. And when my parents used to tell me stories about fleeing, you know, literally people in their backyards with guns, they used to tell me about how they would sleep in caves because they were fleeing people with guns. So in a city that has the resources and the capabilities and the ability to mitigate some of these issues, it's really saddening to see that there's people sleeping on Church Street. It's really saddening to see that we have the resources, we have the economy of the lake, we have the economy of Burlington. Burlington in itself is the state's economy. And to see some of these issues so prominent in a city that really has everything is really, really sad. And I want to get involved to mitigate some of those things. Opioid epidemic is another thing that's happening right in our backyards that we're really, really slow to. And a lot of these things we are doing a lot. You know, even housing, there's a lot of nonprofit organizations that are doing a lot. COTS, even Champlain Housing or Burlington the Housing Authority. All those institutions are there, but they need more support, and I feel like our city is not being as proactive as it can be. I feel like we're reacting to a lot of things, and we can be a lot more proactive. So for me, it's about the energy that we bring, and it's about recalibrating and recalculating our city's priorities and what things are actually important to us. Things such as a mural downtown, maybe it is racist, maybe it's not, but what's really important is that there are people that are sleeping outside on Church Street that don't have housing. And so I want to get involved because I think that's unacceptable, and I think there's a lot that we can do. We can invest more in our housing trust. We can take care of and protect our inclusionary zoning. We can, and again, we can even bring together some of these organizations that already exist to assist in some of these issues, and we can just bring them together. And even having a committee that is committed to, committed to literally making sure that these things are addressed is important, and we don't have that. Another thing that I really want to figure out is how we can bridge the new American communities that we have into our bigger city. We have to really think about the structure of our city going forward in 20 years and what our workforce looks like and the demographic that we have, and we really have to figure out how to create a bridge so that all our communities are really working together to make Burlington what it is. And I really hope to get involved, to become somewhat of that bridge, and to really help protect all of you and to serve all of you and to make sure that everyone's voice really is being heard.
Thank you. Thanks, Tucker. All right, now we'll open up the floor to questions. So again, if you don't mind going to the microphone, and each one of you can answer every question that's posed. It's for the audience to get to know all of you, if they don't already or know more, or so everybody can have an opportunity to answer all the questions. So first.
Is this one on? It is on?
You don't have to talk into it. It's just
the
ambient.
Okay. All right, cool. Well, my name's Joe LaFleur. I've been living in Vermont now for 6 years, and I'm also proposing myself as a write-in candidate for the city council election here. I decided to kind of get in this thing at the last minute, sort of after it was possible to collect 30 names to actually be on the ballot. Because what I really see out of I think these three candidates and generally in Burlington here is really a culture of we're doing fine and things can be sort of reformed in moderate ways, and then we can sort of have a better sort of society with that sort of reasoning. whereas I think things need to be radically different. I think we live in a society now where that is that's in free fall, and that we're soon approaching the ground. Climate change, the environmental catastrophe, the lack of education, the lack of access to quality food has now become so dire, so dramatic. The underclass has proliferated to such a degree that that we need truly radical reform. And you know, I just don't see that in the debate here in Burlington, Vermont. So I won't take that much time. I want to read just one basic, just one quote that I'd like to bring to sort of light here. And this is a quote by David Foster Wallace, who's sort of a hero of mine. But he said this sort of shortly before his life ended. He said, "Never before in history has a country been so blessed materially and intellectually, and yet we're miserable. We watch everyone contort about not raising taxes and balancing the budget. It seems bizarre to me that we are one of the least taxed industrial nations on earth. We have all these services, yet punish politicians who raise taxes and dislike politicians for lying when we encourage them to lie. What makes me sad, and what I would like my generation to realize, is that it would be way better for us inside, like in our stomachs, to pay higher taxes, to be able to shelter and feed poor people, not for their sake, but for ours. That we could be the sort of culture that doesn't let people die. Instead, we're the type of people that get all exercised about an extra 4% off our paychecks. How have we become so selfish, so lethally selfish, so sad, so self-indulgent? What I've seen in my 6 years here in Vermont is deafening silence. The deafening silence of childhood poverty, of self-congratulatory bubble life, the silence of exclusion, the silence of a 97% white population, the silence of bumper stickers that say native. It's the silence of a mayor elected with less than 50% of the vote. It's the silence of nepotism. So shame on the bourgeois wealth of this town. I've seen more morality and more ethics in some of the most destitute, impoverished places on planet Earth. And I've been to over 40 countries in my life. Those places have a lot more soul than we have these days. We need radical change here in Burlington, Vermont. Thanks. My name is Joe LaFleur, and you can write me in as a candidate.
Do you mind just going to the mic? The microphone is for the filming, not so much for the room, but that way they can hear what you're saying.
My name is Fareed Manarsha, and I just want to ask each candidate where they stand on the ballot item on the changes for the downtown improvement district, and where they stand on that, why they support or they're against it. Thank you.
I'll be supporting the expansion of the downtown improvement district. I think there's a lot that from that district that can really enhance the downtown and make us into that destination that really can draw tourism, and it will help put Burlington on the map, so to speak, in the same way that back in the Sanders administration, when they really expanded the Church Street Marketplace, and that really became that vision really led to your proliferation of small independent businesses, as well as just extra putting more kind of bringing people to Burlington, getting people exposed to our great little city, and then just getting people outside, communicating with each other. So, and I think the downtown improvement district, or the expansion of that district, can really kind of just further expand the kind of that growth that we've seen over the past couple decades, and and just become cleaner, more welcoming downtown.
Go ahead.
So I would support it on the condition that it is a lot more accessible and it doesn't criminalize homelessness and it doesn't have the rhetoric that essentially says that the homeless folks are the reason why this park isn't as beautiful as we want it to be right now. And so for us to make this development, and it is all of a sudden going to mitigate, again, the important issues that we should be addressing. As I keep saying, the city in itself is prioritizing things that I personally do not think should be prioritized. If we are going to make developments, the homeless should be included, and we should also figure out how to make sure that they are being taken care of. So for me, I would, but I can't, because I don't think it's accessible, and I don't think it's for everyone. And I think it is very clear that it's for a specific group of people, and I don't want our public amenities to be for tourists and developers. I want them to be for the people and the residents of Burlington.
I support the Downtown Improvement District because I think it provides an opportunity to bring private money into a public benefit. So I know there's been a lot of talk about this being a privatization of our downtown, but it is not. We're not selling off the streets. We're not blocking off the streets. The city is still responsible for the streets and sidewalks, but it provides a way where the businesses can actually invest their money in additional enhancements. And a good example of that on Church Street is actually there were a lot of problems with behaviors on Church Street and people with mental illness. And what the businesses did was they got together and they were the ones who funded the outreach program on Church Street, which was the kind thing to do and has been really helpful to everyone. And it's been helpful to the people who were having problems on a daily basis. And it was a compassionate approach. And I appreciate that that has been the approach of our businesses, rather than to shun or remove people, to actually make an effort to help them. And it's through organizations like the Downtown Improvement District that we can do more of that. It's also a marketing tool so that the businesses can pool their money for marketing, as they do on the Church Street Marketplace. And they can do enhanced public work projects, like the city is going to plow the streets and they're going to plow the sidewalks, but the DID provides an opportunity to kind of upgrade that service level. All of the structures that will be set up have to be approved by the city council, so there's still a public element and public oversight. Residents will also be included in that, so it's I think we have a good mix of people at the table, including human services.
Hi, I'm Mark Friedenberger. Mohammed, I was very interested in your comments about building stronger linkages between the New American community and the rest of the city of Burlington. I'd like to have some suggestions on specifics that you have in mind, and then turn the same question to the other two who are part of this community. Thanks.
So in terms of specifics, I've actually, as soon as I got back from school, and I graduated in May. Again, my name is Mohammed Jafar. When I got back, I immediately got involved, and I'm on the board for the registration of voters, as well as several other boards, but that one in particular, during the election, before it actually, we set up a forum, a City Hall forum with New American Communities and Senator Bernie Sanders, in which we provided voter information and had those communities get, familiar with our senator, our legislator, and what that turned out to result in folks coming out to vote. And a lot of people after the election were concerned, though, that there wasn't enough accessibility in the way of interpreters or people, directing them. And those ballots are very confusing to understand, even for those of us that are proficient in English. So imagine, knowing the bare minimum in order to, or being able to just communicate and having to, navigate those ballots. So several people reached out to me throughout the community, and I reached out to the Secretary of State, and we are actually in the process of figuring out if we can implement technology, translation technology, as well as interpreters, and we are even talks about a pilot program. So aside from that, just getting people, the information about voting, and City Councilor Joan and I actually just recently put together another event in which we had school board members and city councilors come and meet more New American communities. And when I say New American communities, I don't mean just me. People have been coming here since before the 1980s. There's Bosnian communities, Vietnamese communities, Bhutanese communities, Sudanese communities, Somali communities. All these communities exist. And we really, really have to figure out how to get these communities to be more immersed into the bigger city, because we have a rich, rich culture. I mean, we are wealthy with culture, and we can really utilize that. And a lot of people come from their different countries with skill sets that, that they may not be able to communicate through English. And some people, English isn't a prerequisite to be an engineer, right? You can be an engineer in any language, but if you don't speak English, it makes it very tough to be an engineer in Vermont and in the United States. So if we can figure out ways to mitigate a lot of those issues that make it a barrier and a jump to get, and a lot of these resources, again, exist. It's all about figuring out how to create that bridge and create some sort of connection. And a lot of that has to do with, creating representation for those folks. And there have to be people that they can both go to and get the information that they need from, but also understand as someone that they can, look up to and see that there are other folks in the community that are getting involved in city politics, and you are able to affect and make change and, talk and address the things that are bothering you. So for me, it's deeper than just city council. I do plan on, making sure that there really is a bridge, and city council and the school board are two institutions that serve these communities. I really think that there should be direct communication, and it should be a lot better. So we can work together on that. I'll chat with you after.
Thank you, Mohammed. Paco?
Yep. So again, I'm Paco de Francis, independent, and so first of all, I think it's extremely important the work that Mohammed has been doing and has done over the last year, over the summer. That's just ensuring that New Americans are connected with our democratic tools and our democracy and involved in that democracy it's so important to the sustainability and the growth of our city and the state. And to go along with that, if you look at the statistics, look at the demographics, the non-New American community in Burlington and throughout Vermont in general has been shrinking. The New Americans that's our only talk about growth, and I'm a very pro-growth. I consider myself a very pro-growth candidate. That is like the one tunnel of growth that we have is this the New American community, and ensuring that they have all the connections that they need and have the resources that they need to really succeed, and make sure that they have the tools. So and you can look at my platform on my website pacodefrancis.com, and I have a couple. So I have two strategies that I'd hope to do that. One is a microloan program of $3,000 for New Americans as they come in, and is a revolving loan fund, zero interest loans over short term, 12, 24 months, 36 months maybe, of just getting credit so that they can really get established in our community. Whether they need to, who knows, what they need to use it. They need to use it to get a down payment on a car, register a car, so they can have transportation to get around. If maybe just for a down payment on an apartment. A lot of each individual is would be different, but to have that starting capital, fresh capital, would be very important for a lot of someone who just came to this country with nothing but clothes on their back. And to go along with that, I'm also we can fund that with by selling. What I want to do to fund that is sell that corner lot on South Winooski and Main Street. It's just an underutilized parking lot with tremendous real estate value that the city owns right now. We liquidate that, we can get off the city's balance sheet, and then use the proceeds of that sale to start this loan, to start a revolving loan fund. So no impact to taxpayers. And then I'm also hoping to, we need to invest more in higher ed. Vermont is the lowest in public higher ed expenditure, on a per student basis, on a per resident, per GDP. We're, at the bottom. So, we can't change what they do in Montpelier, but we can change what we do in Burlington. So I would like to, pick up the slack that the state is not doing in terms of higher ed, and try to attract, maybe work with the Vermont State Colleges, even though they don't have a lot of state money, but get more, both through scholarships, discount tuition to places like Community College of Vermont in Winooski, as well as try to get some type of new city tech college where people can, a lot of college students, it's it's informal. It's no longer the 4-year residential colleges because people don't have time for that. So night classes, classes that people so you can go and get like a nursing assistant's degree, and kind of in healthcare, and a lot of these moderate skilled jobs, they need it might not be a 4-year degree, but it's some level of education, and really making sure that the new Americans have that to, again, kind of, because that's really the, that's our middle class now, because the middle class that used to be in Vermont it's left. They're gone. We've shrunken into irrelevance almost. And that's but the new Americans provide a great future.
Thank you. Go ahead, Joni. Joan, after you have finished, unfortunately, this will be on the question and answer session, but don't be rushed.
Thank you. I think that this question actually is kind of the heart of how I try to work on this city council. We have all identified intractable problems in various areas, and we probably agree on what those problems are. But in order to solve any problem, you have to look for the opportunities. And that is how I have approached trying to engage new Americans. And I have found some opportunities, maybe not as many as I would like, but I felt that it was an opportunity when I heard that Mohammed was interested in getting more involved in politics. And so I reached out to him and invited him to coffee, and he told me he was interested in running for the legislature. And we really, I think, enjoyed those coffees that we had together. And at one of those meetings, Mohammed said, my parents are very interested in city issues, but they, I tell them go to the meetings, and they don't want to go to the meetings. And I said, well, I can understand why they wouldn't want to go to the meetings. Why don't we bring the city to them in a place where they're comfortable and have a meeting just for them? And we agreed that meeting actually was not going to be something that we posted on Front Porch Forum and advertised really broadly, because I didn't want them to feel intimidated. I wanted this to be their meeting and their opportunity to meet with city officials. And I offered to bring both school commissioners and city councilors to the table, and in fact the mayor also joined us at that. And I think it was a huge success. I think Mohammed was really helpful in bringing new Americans to that meeting. I think the city councilors and school commissioners who participated were grateful for the opportunity. There were a whole lot of wonderful conversations and ideas that came out of that. And everybody left saying, we need to do more of this. And in fact, the school commissioners, one school commissioner had said that they were looking for opportunities to do this kind of reach out, and it gave them kind of a model for how to do it. So we will be doing more of that in the future. Also, I have very close friends who are African immigrants who I have worked with for years, as I've probably shamelessly promoted at many NPA meetings. I helped them start the Ethiopian Night at Arts Riot, which has expanded to Ethiopian and Eritrean food in a lot of expanding to Bristol and Middlebury and Waterbury, and they have a wonderful business. They, like many immigrants, are very entrepreneurial, but they needed a little bit of an entree to get into that business, and that's what I try to provide for them. And we continue to work together, and you know, we have a very close relationship beyond that. But they also give me insight into how they view the world and the experiences that they have. And I also am proud to say that I did recruit the first New American that we can all recollect anyway to the city council. Bianca LeGrand was, I think, the first New American in recent memory. There must have been one way back. But the other thing that I think we hear a lot from New Americans as well as others is that we have continued challenges with livable wage jobs and affordable housing. And it's important to maintain livable wage jobs and find opportunities to bring them here. And I think we have, you know, when we can attract companies like Dealer.com and redevelop the General Dynamics site the way it was redeveloped, that's an important step in accomplishing that, and making sure when we're developing City Place that we have affordable housing there. And I do appreciate that affordable housing is not affordable to everyone. It doesn't solve all of the problems, but it's one piece of the puzzle that we need to keep working on.
Okay, well, thank you, the three of you.
Thank you.
Okay, next up we have our school board representatives, Claire Wool and Jeff Wick. Do you guys want to come up here as well?
Thanks, Mary.
Thank you.
Appreciate it.
Thank you, Mary. Hello.
Hey, how are you, Claire?
Oh, good, how are you? Read.
Oh, really? Okay.
Yes.
Sure, that's fine. Well, it's good to be here again. This is Claire Wool, Chairwoman of the Burlington School Board, and I'm Jeff Wick, Vice Chair of the School Board. Claire is also, as you know, your Ward 6 School Board member, and I'm the South District School Board member. And the biggest news this time of year is the budget, the school budget, that is. And in January, well, we'd been working on this since October, approximately, but in January, the board approved a budget for the fiscal year beginning July 1, 2019. And that will be put before you, as everybody here knows, on the March ballot. And we hope you will support it. We think it's a good budget. We think it strikes a balance between cuts and additions. We think it's modest enough, but we also believe there were needs that had gone unmet. We have a school district that has challenges on many levels, and we have attempted to address a few of those. So, but just getting to the numbers and then some of the details. By the way, there's basically it's a one-pager. I put a bunch of copies on the back table, so if anyone wants to grab it and go at the end or whenever you want, you're welcome to. In a nutshell, our current year's budget, the year we're in, is roughly $85 million. And so that's sort of the baseline to think about what we're doing next year. We've sort of built up on that. Well, essentially, there's $2.2 million of what we call increased general fund costs and debt service. By the way, the increased debt service is only $400,000. So 1.8 million of our increase on top of the 85 million is sort of the things that rise in price that we can't really control that well. So in other words, without any programmatic additions or other cuts, next year's budget looks to be 87.2, but we have made budget cuts of $800,000 and some new investments that are 2.3 million. So if you net that out, 2.3 minus 0.8 gets you 1.8 of new additions for a total budget of 88.7 million, which represents a 4.3% increase over last year's budget, or the current year's budget. And as you know, the state funding of education formula is a little bit complex, and it depends on some variables that aren't necessarily available at the time that we or other school districts set their budgets. So we're not entirely certain yet what the tax impact is. We anticipate at this point that the tax impact for somebody who gets no property tax adjustment, you might be familiar, I think about 2/3 or more of Vermonters are income sensitive on their tax bills. That means when you see your tax bill, you see this line item called state payment. And so that reduces the amount you pay. All that to say, if you don't get that, if your income is such that you're not entitled to a state payment, the current estimate is that the education portion of your property tax bill will go up about 4.8%. Now that is just an estimate. Let me give you a comparison from last year. A year ago, the school board passed a budget where we believed at the time your education portion of your tax bill, again, if you didn't get a property tax discount, if you weren't income sensitive, would go up 7.99%. Well, it turned out when the tax bills came out in mid-July, you can bet I looked carefully and I got them and I got the calculator out and did the math. The increase was only 3.4%. It might have been 3.3, 3.4. It's unpredictable is what I'm trying to say. It is my hope, based on some factors at the state level, that there won't be too much of a negative surprise. I'm always hoping for a positive surprise, but best information right now is roughly a 4.8% increase on the school portion of your tax bill, which makes up about 80% of your tax bill. The other 20% is the city portion. And they've been very modest, and I'm grateful for that too, in terms of their budget. So I think overall it's fair. Now, getting into some specifics, I'm not going to take all the air in the room here, so maybe I'll just open this up. I don't know how much in the weeds you want me to get, but on the one-pager that we have in the back, we've actually set forth in great detail the kinds of additions we're making. The school board you have presently is a big believer in direct instruction, providing well-trained bodies either in the classroom or otherwise providing direct assistance and instruction to students. And frankly, as you probably know, from when the time you were a student to now, our public school systems across the country, this is not just us, we're much more than educators, as you know. We're social service providers. There's a lot of stuff that, frankly, I learned when I got on the school board, and even before, having kids in the system in the school district. I was sort of shocked at how much society puts on the public school system to assist its children. And that's just, frankly, the cost of living in a civil society. But we want to be very prudent stewards of our money. And that's what this board has tried to do. But we have added some what we believe are not much needed bodies. For example, we had a very difficult budget climate 3 or 4 years ago, and we chose to cut all of the para-educators in the kindergarten classrooms. You may know that a kindergarten classroom consists of roughly somewhere between 20 and 22 students per class. And for a number of years, there was a full-time classroom teacher plus a para-educator to help out, to help run interference, to help, all the things you can imagine when a number of kids are first entering the public school system. Not all of them have gone through pre-kindergarten situations where they're sort of acclimated to how you're supposed to behave in kindergarten. So not all of them were ready, and et cetera, et cetera. These kindergarten paraeducators turned out to be a great help. We had to cut them. Well, we're starting to put them back. We're not putting them all back in 1 year, but we have made great strides towards putting them back, and we hope that ultimately helps kids. And we believe it will, based on the the data that we've looked at. That's just one example.
And within our vision of the district, we categorize, and like Jeff said, Commissioner Wick said, since October, we have systems leaders. All our building principals get together with the faculty. They identify the needs of their school. We talk about an equitable climate and culture. We identify inclusive teaching and learning. So to Jeff's point, when you come from pre-K and the student-to-teacher ratio in pre-K is 1 to 10, and we bring the 5-year-olds to the public kindergartens where they're up to 22 to between 20 and 24 students to one teacher. And we recognize the needs within our elementary schools here, putting back based on what the systems leaders, the administrators and the teachers are identifying as a need. We listen to that, and that was the sort of the resonating theme in this budget cycle was the teachers that we've cut in the past, we need to put back in. We are feeling the stress of that, and same at the high school, and same of our special educators. So we, for the first time in I would say 2 years, are fortunate enough to identify the needs, in a unifying sense with the principals and the teachers, and be able to put forth these suggestions to present this budget as such with direct instruction in mind. So when we, as a member of the 12 of us in every district, talking about the achievement gap, the achievement gap really begins from birth to 3 years old. And so from 3 to 5 and elementary school and the focus on the early learning ages, this budget reflects a considerable effort to identify those needs. Does that make sense or any questions? And we're happy to go over, like Jeff said, the takeaway, and we'll be posting it on Front Porch Forum, the electronic version of our slide deck that we had presented to City Hall, and we have over the last 2 school board meetings identified those cuts, the reductions that we felt based upon, again, input from the individual schools in the district, areas that we could save, and then areas that we could put back direct instruction to the classrooms.
So perhaps, I want to say one more thing, and then we'll open it up to questions. I know we don't have much time, but
2 minutes.
okay. Well, then we'll just open it up to questions. I do want to say I'm very proud, having really gotten to know the ins and outs of our school district. I'm very proud of Burlington's school district. We have a lot in this city to be proud of, including the education we provide to our youngsters.
Yep.
Any questions?
Yes.
You mentioned the, obviously, education taxes. First of all, the bulk of the education taxes doesn't actually come from homestead taxpayers, like residential taxpayers. It actually comes from the non-residential taxpayers, which includes apartment buildings and commercial land. But you mentioned a lot about what's been happening in Montpelier, and we had two budget showdowns, both revolve around the Ed Fund, the last 2 fiscal years between Governor Scott and the legislature. And I'm wondering, from your point of view, both of your point of view, what would be the best, what would your ideal, outcome be, during this budget season, so that because often there's been this showdown between the Democratic-controlled legislature, who's looked more to increase the statewide property tax bill, whereas the governor trying to kind of shore up the education fund with plugging money here or there, maybe cutting from other places to shore up the education fund so that overall Vermont taxpayers are not or kind of held state from year over year. So I'm wondering what would if you were either in the governor's seat or in Speaker Johnson's seat, what ideally would you want to see in Montpelier?
I would be happy to take that question. And, I think the governor and the legislators all agree that stability is a good thing. If necessary, modest increases that are at or below inflation. I guess I'm thinking in terms of Burlington, because we are a little different from the rest of Vermont. We are not in Burlington experiencing substantial declines in student population. In fact, as others around here know, there are a lot of housing units in Burlington coming online in the next 5 years. A surprising number if you look at the projects, some of the large projects. So we're a little different from the rest of the state. Perhaps the rest of the state, one could argue, does need a little contraction in their spending. I don't know, but I can say Burlington is not exactly like that, which is why my view is more one of, we like stability coming out of Montpelier. Don't throw huge curveballs if you can avoid it. Stability, and then we'll try to promise very modest increases if warranted, year over year, if warranted, meaning growth in student population, that sort of thing.
Yeah, and I agree with what Jeff is saying, and the last thing would be, Act 46, moving here 7 years ago from New York City and, 272 school districts, what was sustainable for a small state, and merging, 45 school districts, creating a net reduction of 34 districts. I mean, that is absolutely, Burlington is not one of those districts that would have to merge because of our size, but, the ability on a finite population to support that many school districts in our state, had to be addressed. And so I'm grateful for Montpelier to have enacted that. And even though it comes with some hardships with some smaller towns, I do believe the offerings to combine and support 21st century learning in greater districts, healthier, in a healthier environment, rather than quantity versus, quality. The number of districts has supported it.
Is there another, do we have time for one more?
We're
No,
out of
that's
time.
fine.
Okay.
Unfortunately, we've got some changes to the
No
agenda.
worries, no worries at all.
So I'm sorry.
That's all right.
We have more time.
You can reach out to us anytime you want.
Yeah.
We're online,
Yep.
bsdvt.org, commissioners page, our phone numbers, our email addresses. Thank you so
Thank
much.
you.
Okay, I'm going to turn it over to
So we've run a little short on time, so what we're going to do now is compress the counselor's update with our public comment period with a presentation by the mayor. So that he's the unannounced presenter this evening, but the counselors have offered to give up some of their time to accommodate his presentation this evening. So how about you go first, Mayor, and then the counselors will take what time is left, if that's okay with them, and then we'll have some time for public comment.
Great. Thanks, Michelle.
You're welcome.
And so, I'm thinking like 10 minutes?
That would be
or-
perfect.
All right, great. I will try to do that. I appreciate you working me on the schedule. I'm setting a timer for myself, so I have a tendency to
We got it, we're good.
go long-winded if I don't keep track here. So, I appreciate you fitting me on in that I thought it was important to come talk to as many NPAs as I can get to about this year's town meeting day ballot, because there are, again, a number of issues that are going to be before you to decide on March, is it 5th this year, right? So, or in the weeks leading up, voting starting very soon. First ballot question number one is, as it usually is, the school budget. And for what it's worth, I will be voting yes on the school budget. I think the school district has a very challenging job. They have a lot to balance, and I won't repeat everything you just heard about it. I think they made some tough choices. There were many other investments being requested, and I think this is a budget that we've got to support. And as someone fully committed to Burlington School District, to the 7th grader at Edmonds and a kindergartner to start next year, we hope at IAA, I'll be voting yes. Ballot question number 2 is the city. Here's ballot question number 2. We are requesting an increase to the general city tax. This is one of several operating taxes that basically fund annual municipal operations. Here's some things to know about this. The tax that we're requesting is approximately a 1.5% increase on the total municipal tax bill. That works out to about $40 for the average Burlington household over the course of a year. If this tax is approved, it will be just the second time in the 8 budgets that I've been responsible for, that I've worked on with the City Council, where we are requesting an increase to these operating taxes. If this passes, over that 8 years, we will still, if you add up the 2 increases that we have sought in that time, it will still be considerably less than the rate of inflation over that time. So we are certainly very mindful that this is a property tax burden community. We pay more property taxes than is comfortable to pay for many of us, and we have been very mindful of that. And even as we have added services, we've worked creatively to find savings, to find efficiencies, and we have found millions and millions of dollars of that, and to find other revenue sources so that we have been able to keep the increased property tax burden low. Fundamentally, this increase is not, what is this about? It is not about some dramatic expansion of services next year. The budget we are anticipating coming forward with will really not expand services substantially. There just fundamentally comes a time in municipal finances, as creative as you are, as much as we try to find other revenue sources, as much as we seek efficiencies, as much as we've been able to save millions of dollars by bringing down our improving our credit rating, there comes times where your choice in municipal budgeting really comes down to either cutting city services or having a modest increase in these taxes, which are our largest funding source. And we believe we're at one of those times, and we hope you'll agree with that and be supporting it. 10 of the 12 city councilors voted yes on this item. I'll try to get all through them, and if there's time for questions, we can come back. Ballot question number 3 is about permit reform. This effort that the City Council and the administration have been working on in some sense for years, that responds to really decades of concerns about the way in which our permitting system functions. Fundamentally, this is a pretty significant change. There's quite a bit of language you will see in there if you read the whole charter change. What it fundamentally allows is to take all the different functions in city government, which are currently split over 3 different departments, and combine them in one new permitting and inspections department. That permitting and inspection department will be located in the Pine Street facility, the building that Public Works is in. There will be there'll be one stop to go there, a one-stop shop, a permit center, instead of having to go into multiple locations within the city for all your paperwork. And there will be a single point of accountability. This new permitting and inspections department will be overseen by one appointed, mayorally appointed department head, confirmed by the City Council. If something's wrong in that system, we'll all know who to look to for answers and to straighten it out. There are a couple other elements of this permit reform charter change as well that if there are questions about, maybe I'll come back to, since I'm like halfway through my time. I can feel my watch buzzing. Ballot question number 4 is about is this issue we're talking is referred to as the downtown improvement district. Basically taking an existing downtown improvement district and giving it significantly enhanced authority and a new nonprofit board that will oversee it and run it. To boil down what this is about, this is really comes down to this from my perspective. We have succeeded and thrived in the downtown Burlington through having, since the 1980s, the Church Street Marketplace, which is a entity that functions to actively manage Church Street. That active management is, I think we all have seen, if you think about it, has been critical to Church Street's success. This effort will expand that active management to essentially the entire downtown. The way in which that active management will be overseen is through this nonprofit board, which is also a shift. That is, it will no longer be a city department. It will be this nonprofit board that oversees this effort. That has provoked some controversy. Maybe you've had some discussion of it here in the past. From my perspective, I think this will be a better way to perform these functions. There remains extremely strong public oversight over anything that this nonprofit board will be able to do. If there's anything that basically goes wrong, the City Council continues to have the authority over all of what we think of as public functions. The city council continues to have full budgetary authority over this entity, and there's fundamentally, if things, if it doesn't work, there's also sunset provisions that kick in. So I think this is a change that is worth trying, and I support it, as do many of the founders of the Church Street Marketplace, Ward 6 resident Pat Robbins and Bill Truex. So they came to the city council as we kicked off this effort and said this in many ways, this was the original idea behind Church Street. It's just taken 30 years to get to this sort of full built out vision. Final one I'll speak to is the business personal property tax. This is ballot question number 5. Confusingly labeled item. This isn't about personal property. This is about non-real estate property owned by businesses. Currently, Burlington is one of the few entities in Vermont that taxes that property as if it were real estate. This has been increasingly seen around Vermont and around the country as a problematic tax. It disincentivizes investment in this community in assets that are quite mobile and that can easily be moved elsewhere. It's one thing to tax real estate that you can't really move around, buildings that are difficult to move around. It's quite another thing when you're talking about taxing the 3D printers at Burton or office equipment in the downtown. This has been a demand, or really a strong interest within the business community for many years, from small businesses to large businesses. We have found a way, if you vote yes on this, to phase out this tax, which is significant. It's about $1 million a year. We have found a way to phase that out in which it will step down over about an 8-year period of time, and most of the step down comes at the end when we will have a significant infusion of cash when the waterfront TIF district expires. So basically, we're finding a way, we think, to get away from this problematic tax that is really hurting investment in Burlington and driving jobs and opportunity elsewhere, and do that with very little impact on existing property taxpayers. Whew. Got through it.
That's awesome. You had 52 seconds left. So, that's awesome.
Can I use my remaining 43 seconds if anyone has any questions? Or?
That's fine. I would also say, if you don't mind just standing here, staying here for a little bit while your counselors join you, is that okay? Joan and Karen, are you okay? Just sort of finding your way up here and
talking about the same things, I think.
Well, in case people have questions for you. So if you're comfortable just
sounds great.
standing tight.
While they're walking up, should we get the first question here?
How is the nonprofit board constituted?
So, great question, and there's been a lot of focus on that as this language around the charter change was finalized over the last couple of months. Basically, a majority of the board will be appointed by the city council, and the fee payers, and that's what these downtown improvement district, like Church Street Marketplace, there will be a special tax assessed on businesses within the downtown, commercial properties within downtown, not residential properties, and that, and so those fee payers will elect some members of the board as well. Within that, there's then a division, a requirement for a number of different perspectives to be represented on the board. There are requirements of residents, there are requirements of nonprofit social service leaderships having membership on the board, as well as business and property owners being on the board. So it's a real mix. That's best summary I can do of it. Good. Hi. Great question. You're right. The question is, aren't rental units considered commercial property? And in many cases, the answer to that is yes. With respect to how property taxes are determined, you have the homestead tax, as was mentioned, which really applies to single-family homes, and then multifamily homes get taxed as commercial property. In this case, it's very explicit. The language is a little confusing. In this case, any residential property will be netted out of the special assessment, and that includes even in mixed-use buildings where you have sort of retail on the ground floor and apartments up above. You would only pay that special fee on the retail element of that property. So really no rental properties, no residential properties at all will pay any extra direct fee as a result of this.
I would just add that there will be residents on the board, so they will have a voice in the organization.
Hey, Sandy.
Hello. So is this basically a way to privatize Church Street and the Church Street Marketplace? Because now you have a private board governing that very public space. Is that correct?
So there are certainly some people that are arguing that, Sandy, and have suggested this is privatization. That's not the way the majority of the council that voted yes on it sees it. There is a non-profit board that is being created to oversee this. No public asset is being transferred out of government. No public authority is being transferred. Essentially, we are authorizing this nonprofit board to speak for this district and to give, to take on these responsibilities, a lot of which comes down to marketing, a lot of which comes down to beautification, and so we do not see it as a privatization of any important public assets or functions, I think is the best way to say it. One important additional thing is Church Street Marketplaces. These are very common organizations, these improvement districts. There are about 1,000 of them nationwide. They are seen as one of the great innovations in management of downtowns nationally. Almost every successful, thriving downtown has one of these. Almost none of them are organized the way the Church Street Marketplace currently is. They are almost all organized in this way that is being proposed of having a nonprofit board. And moreover, in the kind of Burlington fashion, we are retaining oversight of that board to a much higher degree than I think any other one that we've studied. So I think we've been sensitive to that concern, and we think this is important to do this way, and that's why the council voted, strong majority. What was it in the end? I think there were 8 or 9 councilors that voted yes on this, and I can't remember. Yeah, so.
I think that's probably the crux of whether people will vote yes or no on this question. Yeah. And it's an important question, and I think there are examples of DIDs out there that do privatize the assets, but we have really done everything that I think we can to avoid that. And a very important aspect of this is that the city council gets to approve the management plan that the commercial property owners are actually taxing themselves for improvements, but we approve the management plan. And they've done some surveying, and the expectations of what it is that they want to pay for are alternative transportation improvements, marketing support for downtown, streetscape improvements off of Church Street, which would be improved lighting, landscaping, cleanliness, improved connections between downtown and the waterfront, improved accessibility. These are things that we want to do, but we don't want to tax all of Burlington to do it. And this provides a way for the businesses to tax themselves for these enhancements that I think will benefit everybody. Also making the downtown safe, an ambassador program to provide wayfinding support and welcoming services, added maps, support services for the most vulnerable citizens with the Howard Center outreach team, and improved parking services. So I do think that this is structured to not privatize. The city still has to provide all of those public services that we currently provide, but there's an opportunity for further enhancement from private sector dollars.
So, according to our bylaws, we need to incorporate 10 minutes for public comment at this meeting. And if you folks have the time, you might want to stick around. If people want to aim a question during this public comment period towards the councilors and the mayor, please feel free to do that if you can stay. Or if you want to bring up an issue or make a statement that is unrelated to the ballot items, please do that. Just remember, we're going to share the time, so keep that in mind. Hi, Larry. Do you want to?
Thanks. I'm Larry Lewack. I'm a neighborhood resident on that side of Shelburne Road, but I was invited to come to this evening's meeting by Charles mostly to talk about this proposed DID charter change. I'm one of a group of individuals in the city who have taken on organizing to defeat this initiative. I'm here to tell you that this is not well thought out, that a lot of the representations that you heard from the mayor and the councilors, I strongly disagree with. There's really a case to be made that, in fact, this is an effort to privatize our public space downtown. The best metaphor I can give you is think about what happens when you walk in the doors of the University Mall. This is a private space governed by the businesses that make up the mall, businesses who work at the mall, and I know this because my daughter is a retail store manager at the University Mall. They tell you when you have to open in the morning. They tell you when you have to stay open till at night. They have private cops who patrol the space and regulate behaviors, including the expression of political views that the management may or may not agree with. And if they don't like what you're saying or doing, even if it's not breaking any laws or infringing on anyone's rights, they'll throw you out. And that's really a lot like the kinds of patterns that tend to emerge when these DID districts are created across the country. One of our members has done extensive research into how these districts operate across the country, and what happens, despite what you've heard tonight, is that rents go up. Low-income renters get pushed out as the rents go up. When the fees that they're talking about, which will be assessed as part of this district, are passed on in the form of higher rents by the property owners. The representation and decision-making on this private group is going to be majority business owners. The type of organization of nonprofits, and I happen to know a lot about nonprofits. I make my living in the nonprofit sector as a consultant and as a program director. The type of nonprofit form of organization that they're proposing for this new entity is a 501c6. If you look up on the IRS website what a 501c6 is about, it's a business league. It is much like a trade association formed for and operated for the best interests of the business owners who control the organization. So that is what we're buying into if we support this change. I would submit the choice here is not between do we take steps to make our downtown marketplace and surrounding streets more competitive by allowing the collection of fees from a larger scope than the businesses that front on the Church Street blocks today. And the answer, I think, is pretty clear that there is other ways to accomplish that objective. I actually support, and most of the members of my group support, more effective marketing efforts and more extensive efforts to enhance the quality of life in our downtown. The question is, really, that question that has not been adequately answered by the proponents of this is, why don't we simply enlarge the scope of the existing Church Street Marketplace Commission and the definition of the district so that more businesses can be assessed, thus avoiding the free rider problem that we have now, where businesses that are close to Church Street are not paying fees, but are reaping the benefits of being close by the marketplace, which is the object of those fees.
So Larry, I'm going to ask you to pause right there.
Yeah?
So, and you'll have time to restart if
Yes.
no one else has a comment or a question or
Okay.
something else that they want to discuss during this public comment period.
Yeah, more kind of a question for the councilors and the mayor, and also one comment. I thought the analogy of the University Mall is extremely strange because that's entirely a private, private real estate. It, is in foreclosure. It's a private development with private property, 1 million square feet, and that's much more akin to an HOA. Like the commercial equivalent of a kind of an HOA group, or even just like, landlord or the landlord of that mall, gives to the renters to manage, and they can do whatever they want. That's a private business. The Downtown Improvement District is on public streets that will remain public. So I thought that analogy was very odd. The question I had was for the mayor is about. You mentioned the city tax rate going up. I'm wondering what effect. We have about a $76 million unfunded actuarial. That's what the actuaries said unfunded pension liability, and that's I believe that assumes a 6% rate of return on the current pension fund. And I'm wondering what portion of that increase was to manage pension, the retirement tax and pension obligations, as well as what steps are being taken by the administration and by the council in effort to move towards defined contribution pensions for either current employees, different class. I know there's several classes of employees.
Can I wrap that question
Yep.
up so that Mayor can answer it, so we can preserve some time for other folks to.
Okay, great. So the answer to what of this 1.5% tax increase, how much of that is going to address rising pension costs? None of it. We've actually had an extended period now where after a huge run-up in the cost of the public pension program from around the year 2000 to 2015, we went from the taxpayers paying about $1 million a year to taxpayers paying $9 million a year. Dramatic, one of the real drivers of increases in your property taxes. We had the administration with the city council and the unions spent a year talking about how we were going to address this, and then put a number of reforms in place that have essentially kept the taxpayer amount flat for four straight years. You're still paying that $9 million. That will not go on forever. We're doing a whole bunch of things that have caused that to happen. We've asked employees to pay a substantially larger share of the pension costs than before. That is probably the biggest change. We've also stopped spending hundreds of thousands of dollars unnecessarily on the active management of our funds and have moved towards passive management of our funds, and more. We are doing nothing at this point towards your proposed solution, which has been the solution in the private sector and in universities of moving away from a defined benefit to a defined contribution system. Very few public entities have done that. I don't think Burlington, Vermont is going to be the place that leads that charge, certainly not while I'm mayor.
So we have time for one more quick question. Is there anyone who hasn't spoken yet or presented yet who would like to say something?
I would just want to follow up that because it was, we heard one side, and I know you spoke to the other, but the BID and the thought of with that on the ballot, coming from Manhattan, Manhattan alone had 25 neighborhood alliances, and without them, they are instrumental in the safety of those neighborhoods, us being Greenwich Village. But, I had plenty of friends that worked on this for sanitation purposes, services, marketing. We are this downtown is growing, and a commission alone to manage the needs of that downtown and enhance it. I see the need for this type of organization to address and be leading rather than maintaining what exists now. I think there are a number of accountability concerns that people look to and blame City Hall for. That is, if it was housed under this format, which is successful, and they're all in Manhattan, they all are 501c6s. This is proven. Google BIDs in New York City. Every borough has a plethora of them, and they're incredibly successful. And I am appreciative of the forward thinking of City Council in that matter. Thank you.
Okay, unfortunately, we have to move our agenda along. I want to thank the councilors and the mayor for joining us tonight. And they're easy to reach if you have comments or questions that you didn't have a chance to ask or to tell. The last item on our agenda this evening is a discussion on ranked choice voting. It's also known as instant runoff voting. We have our state senator, Chris Pearson, here. He is introducing a bill in the session this year that would put Vermont on the path to use IRV. We also have Sandy Baird here. We have Rob Backus, and we have Kurt Wright out back there, who all have an opinion on this issue. And hopefully you all do too, and you can ask your questions. Great. Yeah, I am. Yeah. So I'm just going to give this topic an overview. So IRV, or ranked choice voting inspires some very strong opinions. And what's interesting is that Burlington introduced it in 2000 something. Six. It had a very short-lived tenure as a voting practice in this city. It was voted out almost as quickly as it was voted in. But what's interesting is that it's not going away. Folks may have seen in the Burlington Free Press recently that New Hampshire is proposing to implement RCV or IRV in their presidential primaries. They'd be used in federal and state elections. Maine last year used ranked choice for their federal general election. That's all they would be using it for, in addition to statewide primaries. But also last year, Massachusetts, Connecticut, Hawaii, and Wyoming all introduced bills last year to implement ranked choice voting. So it's not going away. It might be coming to us if Chris has his way. And what we're going to do is just allow each of you to make a statement about your position on IRV, and then we'll open it up to questions or to a conversation amongst yourselves if there aren't more questions. So take 2 or 3 minutes.
Okay.
4.
Sure. Well, obviously I support it. That's why we're looking at legislation in the Senate, and actually I'm working with folks in the House to, in fact, they approached me to introduce a bill in the House. The main experience was brought about through a referendum there where voters had to, in fact, several times affirm their interest in a ranked ballot. And just to make sure we all know what we're talking about, the terms are shifted interchangeably: instant runoff voting or ranked choice ballot. The concept is you rank your candidates. So if there's 4 candidates running for Congress in Vermont, that can create some challenges. It can create a challenge where somebody wins who isn't the choice of most Vermonters. They win with 42% of the vote, for instance. It can create a dynamic where, let's say, 2 left-leaning candidates split the vote, and in fact, a conservative who is not the choice of the majority takes office. It is basically trying to recognize that voters, particularly young voters, but voters across the board, are not terribly enamored with the 2 political parties, the 2 dominant parties. They don't identify with the 2 parties, and yet our system is, first past the post system, is inherently advantageous to the 2 big parties and disadvantageous to independents or third-party candidates. So what happens if you rank your ballot is you just literally would fill in choice number 1, choice number 2, choice number 3, if you want, or you just fill in choice number 1. And then there is a majority requirement. A candidate has to earn over 50% of the vote to win the election. And so it's quite possible, in fact, entirely likely that you will just count up everybody's first choice, and somebody gets 50.2% and they win. But in the event that nobody gets this majority threshold, you would look, if we had 4 candidates running, you would look at the person that came in 4th, and you would look at all those ballots, and you would reassign those votes to, you'd say, okay, well, who did they pick for number 2? And you would add those number 2s to the remaining 3 candidates until somebody got over 50%. It's fairly straightforward. If you ask kindergartners to rank their ice cream flavors, first, second, and third, they can handle it. So this is the concept, It is law in Maine. It was wildly successful, actually. Exit polling showed very great satisfaction in Maine. It was challenged in court before, after. It was held up in court. So that's kind of handy to know. The federal courts that would also cover Vermont upheld these. And it's been used in municipalities all over the country. It is, in fact, the choice of the Political Science Association, the people that really study this. And I think it's time to explore that for our state races.
Thanks, Chris. So, Sandy, would you go next, and then Rob, and then Kurt?
Sure. My name is Sandy Baird, and I'm actually a resident of Ward 1, so thank you for allowing me to be here in Ward 6 NPA. A number of years ago, Burlington did adopt an IRV system, and that's an instant runoff system. And that system was automatically pretty much rejected the next year. That I think it only was for twice that we had IRV here, but it was instantly repealed. And one of the reasons was, I think, and Kurt and I actually were campaigned against that system for that whole term of that election. And the reason I did was that it's not a real runoff. That's mainly why I felt that that was correct. An instant runoff is that you, as Chris said, you rank your choices. However, in our system, which I believe is not broken, and my philosophy basically is you don't fix what's not broken. Our system in Burlington says that if the candidate does not get 40%, there's a real runoff between the top two candidates. And that occurs approximately 10 days or so later, where there's a brand new kind of election. And then you get to pick between those two. And that is a real runoff. This runoff, this instant runoff, really isn't a runoff because you are ranking votes and accepting that you might get, for instance, a guy who does not get first place. In the election that I was concerned about, and that was an election that Kurt actually ran for mayor, the first place, the person who won only got 29% of the first place votes, and that was Mayor Kiss. And what happened about that was that people were very unhappy that that happened. I believe that that's why it was instantly repealed. It was by a vote of the voters, and a majority of people in Burlington first voted for IRV and then instantly rejected it in another vote. So I would argue if we're going to accept a system that gives us a person that only is 29% of the first place voters, I don't think that's a really good system. I think it's kind of, it discourages people from, it can encourage them not to vote in a way. And the other reason that I personally didn't love the vote was that I bullet voted because I wanted that person first choice. But I didn't then get to participate in any runoff. If you think about it, because I didn't rank the voters. So I never got to participate in the runoff at all. If it had been a real runoff, later, brand new election, then it would have been a real runoff and I would have had a chance to vote between the top two contenders. There's many other reasons. I was a teacher at the time of IRV at Burlington College, and I tried to explain this system over and over to my students, and they never understood it, ever. Maybe it's because I couldn't explain enough, but I tried, and I had people from the pro-IRV camp come and the anti-IRV camp come, and they couldn't help either. People just didn't understand it, and I don't think that that makes an informed voter. Anyway.
Thanks, Sandy. Rob?
So I'm pro-IRV. When I was on the city council 97 to 2001 representing Ward 5, I advocated for it. It wasn't voted in then, but it was shortly after. And when it was repealed, I think the vote was 48% to 52%. So there was still a lot of support for IRV. The reason I support it really strongly is that I think that it creates discussion. It creates an opportunity for many voices to be heard without the fear that the wrong person's going to get elected. And I think that that really promotes democracy and it promotes open conversation. And let me explain how I think that works. Let's look at that mayoral race that Kurt lost. And The way that was done on the first ballot, Kurt had the most votes, but he didn't have 40%. On the next, and then Bob Kiss was second, and then Andy Montrell was third. So under the current system, that would have gone to a runoff, and it would have ended up with the same result. Bob Kiss would have been first, and Kurt Wright would have been second. So I don't see that as having been a damage to any candidate. But what it did mean is that any voter who wanted to vote for Andy Montrell because they thought he was the best candidate didn't have to worry that they were electing Kurt Wright instead of Bob Kiss. All right? Looked at it another way. There were a lot of voters who voted for Andy Montrell who actually preferred Kurt Wright. It went both ways. They didn't have to worry that in voting for Andy Montrell, they were electing Bob Kiss. And what it meant was that all three of those candidates could run. They could bring out the discussion. They could bring out the conversation. They could create a dialogue that enriched what we, the voters, had in our minds when we went to the poll to vote. That cannot happen in a winner-take-all situation. The second thing that it does is I think it promotes third-party candidates, and I think that's critical. One of the strengths of Burlington, Vermont, is that we have three parties. I mean, I'm a dyed-in-the-wool Democrat, but I am really glad that we have three strong parties because what it basically means is most of the time there's no majority. Everybody has to work with other people in order to get something done, and that's healthy. And that's democracy working in a way that serves all of us.
Thank you. And Kurt?
Thanks. And Rob, thank you for reminding me how I
Can you
love.
speak right into the mic?
And thank you. I love it when people remind me about my losing race. So thank you for that,
Well, at
former
least you
Councilor
got
Beckett.
closer than Andy.
So let's start with the system that we have now, the current system, the most system that we've used for a long time. What has that produced? If we had changed to the system, do we know that we would have had Abraham Lincoln as president of the United States? Do we know that we would have had Woodrow Wilson? Do we know that we would have had John Kennedy as president? We don't. And by the way, do we know that Bernie Sanders would have ever gotten elected under this system? We don't. I think that the system that we have in Burlington has worked well. And in fact, we want to keep a system in place that allows a candidate like Bernie Sanders to come along and galvanize a significant, if not over 50%. He galvanized a significant number of people, 43%, and became mayor, and obviously turned it into a pretty big career. So we don't know what would have happened if we'd had this IRV system in place. Now, what was promised with IRV? It was promised as this exciting new voting system that was going to achieve all these things. So what were some of the things? It was going to do away with negative campaigning. Did it? In fact, no, it did not. In 2009, Andy Montrell had accusations lobbed at him of conflict of interest. It was really quite nasty. But what it did do was it created a vanilla, homogenous type of campaign with people afraid to take strong and vigorous stands. And while we don't want super negative campaigning, my view on that always is let the voters sort that out. If somebody goes over the line, and I can think of candidates in Vermont that have, and they paid a price for it, let the voters sort that out. Don't try to do it by creating a new system, because in fact, what that created was a system where people were afraid to take strong stands. While we don't want negative campaigning, we do want candidates taking vigorous, strong stands and not being afraid to do that. I think in a city like Burlington, that's the last thing we want, is to create these type of homogenous type campaigns. Did it create this exciting new system that increased voter turnout? Well, in fact, no, it did not. The turnout was significantly lower than it was in 2012 and lower than it was in 2018. As far as what former Councilor Backus says, that we know how that election would have turned out, well, we don't know how it would have turned out. It is not exactly the same to say that you know that the votes that were cast on one ballot would be the same as they would be as if you now had the extra information later in a real runoff where you knew who the two candidates actually were that were opposing each other. People cast strategic votes when there is one ballot that they're voting on. Many people told me that they were trying to game the system, trying to figure out how to game it, and casting votes for a second place vote that they thought would help their first place candidate. So the idea that we know that in a actual real runoff, that the results would be exactly the same, I do not subscribe to that theory whatsoever. And I think in Burlington, what we also saw and why voters repealed it, and I know people will say, well, the turnout was not, it was not so high when it got repealed. But what I would counter that with is if people wanted IRV so badly, they would have come pouring out in that next election to make sure we kept it in place. And where were they? They didn't come out. But the people that did come out were the ones that wanted to give it the boot. It did not instill confidence in the voters of Burlington. It created confusion, and it actually decreased voter confidence in our voting system. So I think that, and in fact, in some places, it's not just Burlington where it was repealed. It's been repealed in other places in the country as well. So I would acknowledge that there is no perfect voting system. And if someone told me to make the case for IRV, I could make the case as to why there are some positives to it. But when I look at all the ramifications to it, both positive and negative, I think that the negatives significantly outweigh the positives. So, thank you.
Can I make one,
So
sorry.
you each had a chance to state your position. Is there anyone who wants to ask a question? Okay. How about you? You haven't spoken yet. And if you don't mind, come up.
My name is Jim Brown. I have one question and one comment. I'm wondering if any studies have been done. It seems like there's been a lot of activity at the national level involving this voting method. Have any studies been done that actually compare the traditional voting method and this runoff method to see if they achieve the same results? Somebody must have studied that.
I don't know then.
I mean, achieve what same
Yeah,
results?
right.
And if they elect the same person at the end of the day after the runoff vote, as opposed to the method you're talking
I'm not
about.
aware of a study that could do that because you know, either you have one system or you have another. The example from November in Maine, which is the first time any state, to my knowledge, has used it, is indicative, I think, and telling. The Republican in the Northern Congressional District came in first with, I don't know, 44, 46%. An independent came in badly third, and the Democrat came in narrowly second. The independent results were retallied and added to the Democrat. The Democrat went to Congress. That district was not interested in electing a Republican, and had a way to reveal that, to express that on the ballot because of that. The other alternative, any other system would have elected the Republican, very plainly. So, but to your specific question, I'm not sure how you would study that. There's a lot of data around ranked ballots in terms of voter satisfaction and voter participation. It's variations are used all around the world and all around this country have been in municipal elections, particularly for decades.
And let me just remind you, though, when you say that it's all these places in the country, some of the places that Michelle mentioned, those are bills that have been proposed. As a member of the let me Chris, if you mind.
In place.
No, what's that?
Except in Maine. where it's
No, I understand in Maine, but you mentioned other places like Wyoming, and the idea that a bill is proposed. I mean, 1,000 bills get proposed in Vermont, for example, and a tiny fraction of those ever become law. So any time a bill can get proposed, that doesn't mean by any means that it's going to become law. Just to make that point clear.
Can I ask him a question? I'm sorry.
Go ahead.
So in Maine, who came in first?
In the first count, it was the Republican came out ahead.
That's my point, yeah.
I was thinking more like in an academic setting, and I don't know how you'd structure it either, but it seems like it would be an interesting question for someone in that setting to ask.
So there's a professor at UVM who is an expert in this, and we couldn't get him to come here this evening. He's published on this topic, and his first name is Anthony. Someone may know his last name.
Krasinski.
There we go. So,
Okay,
you know,
good. I'll look into it.
And ask him.
Look him up. He'll tell you why it's a bad idea also.
And now my comment, which is
he's
hopefully
against
going to be briefer. I think it's an interesting idea, but it's clearly difficult to understand and to explain I think you need to figure out a way to boil it down into like 3 graphs, 3 talking points, or you're going to lose people.
And you can't.
It lends itself to visuals very easily. If you had a whiteboard, it'd help you.
If only voters picked candidates like they picked ice cream, right? This system would work great.
Dad, I've heard that argument before, and it's kind of insulting.
But unfortunately, it's a little different than picking chocolate or pecan or vanilla ice cream. If I could, oh, go ahead, make your.
All right. So there's an interesting video on YouTube done by Minnesota Public Radio. I'm from Minnesota. I was just this afternoon explaining instant runoff voting to my 5-year-old daughter, who is actually capable. I mean, she could come here and explain it to you. I know you had university students you claim that could not understand it. I mean, that is like my brain, like a nuclear bomb is going off in my brain, trying to understand how a university student cannot wrap their head around instant runoff voting and how you can make that point. And I think you probably went around to citizens.
If Ms. Baird said it, it's true.
Yeah. So and I think you went around to citizens in Burlington, Vermont, and said exactly that sort of thing. That it's some sort of convoluted, incredibly difficult thing to understand. It is literally watch the NPR video on YouTube. You take 3 sticky notes. What you do is say there's purple, yeah. It's like ice cream. It is literally like ice cream. That is an excellent analogy. I mean, you actually have hit the nail on the head there, Kurt. It is that simple. You rank your three types of ice cream, and then if you don't get the one you really want, you get the one you want in second place. I mean, it is conceptually that we consider ourselves a sophisticated, intelligent place and cannot wrap our heads around instant runoff voting is, I can't get that. I'm sorry. My brain.
Thanks for the question. Thanks for the question. But the reality is.
We have someone else who wants to ask a question.
Firstly, I'd just like to say, as someone who has been a student of Sandy, she, is very passionate, explains things excellently. So
thank you.
Just had to throw that out there.
I would love the respect, though, to listen like we did when you talked.
But anyways, I just, Mr. Pearson, what did you said that in Maine it was very well received, and what was the statistics on it? Because unfortunately, I have a lot of family members in Maine who maybe don't agree with me all the time, and I know several of them, well, not exactly the most informed people, are very upset about the way that election did turn out. So I was wondering the actual majority of the state felt.
Well, you can look up the news reports, but the exit polling before people knew the results were kind of indicative and expressed, most folks expressed enjoying the process, but I don't have the numbers.
Is there anyone on the panel, Sandy, you want to say something?
Yeah, I did, because first of all, politicians are not like ice cream. You know, this is a very important decision. It's not which ice cream that you like best in second place, whatever. Politicians are real people, real issues, real differences, and it's just not as simple when you vote for your ice cream flavor or important as when you vote for a politician. I want to confirm Kurt's ideas about those elections. What happened was the politicians in the races with IRB were attempting to also get second place votes. They were attempting to get first place votes and then second place votes. So all the issues got all kinds of, it was a big muddle. Nobody knew what anybody stood for. I remember that at one point it was Hinda Miller who was running in that race, and she said, the only thing anybody's asking me is who am I going to vote for second place? And that was a tragedy. And what he said is correct. It became totally like vanilla ice cream. It became totally like a muddle of issues. The other thing I want to mention is that I like third parties often. I vote third party often. But then why don't we accept a plurality? Why don't we just say the person with the most votes wins, not a majority? That would favor third parties. I think that's how Peter Clavell won. Anyway, so I think that some of the things associated with IRB is a total myth.
Thanks, Sandy. I just want to check and see if there's another question before Kurt chimes in. Okay. Go ahead, Joan.
I'm actually a longtime supporter of IRV, but at the same time, I appreciate that the voters of Burlington didn't have confidence in the system, and I don't think voters should have a voting system that they don't have confidence in. So I'm wondering, from kind of both sides here, there are other voting systems, and I wonder if, Kurt and Sandy kind of see any flaw in our current system. I mean, I think with 3 parties, you often feel like you might end up with your worst choice. There's the spoiler effect that we're always concerned about, and you might end up with your last choice if you don't pick the right first choice. But are you willing to look at other voting systems, and do Rob and Chris have any experience with other voting systems that you think could work?
I would say that I already said to start this out that no voting system is perfect. There is no perfect voting system. So I would entertain another system if somebody can show me a system that voters can understand. And I'm sorry, but not everybody does understand this system. And as you said, the confidence in the system was undercut. I know many seniors who did not understand it, and plenty of people that did not. I would add one additional point. I mean, so if there's another system that is simpler to understand and that achieves a different kind of result than this one did. I mean, this one resulted in a mayor, an incumbent mayor, and it's not about that I lost, because I'm not by any means trying to claim that if we didn't have IRV, I would have won. Some people think that, but I'm not making that claim. But it did produce a mayor who got only 29% first place votes, a stunning rebuke for an incumbent mayor. But this system allowed him to continue as mayor, and probably only with this system. But I would also add, along with that the other reason that IRV failed and was repealed is not only did the first place winner, the person that got the most first place votes, the votes that really mean the most, but the person that got the most first and second place votes also didn't win. So the incumbent mayor, who was rebuked by 71% of the voters, and also did not get the most combination of first and second place votes, managed to continue and win as mayor. And this was before the incredible controversy about Burlington Telecom was revealed. So I think that's a system that is incredibly flawed. It showed itself to be incredibly flawed. Maine may like it right now, but guess what? Wait until they have an experience that they don't like, just like Burlington did.
Chris, do you want to chime in?
Sure. Sandy, you mentioned a plurality system.
Yeah, why not?
That is what we have. That's what we do to elect everybody. So that's an odd comment. If you look at spoiled ballots, this is one of the ways we measure whether or not our elections are successful. Very, very, very few spoiled ballots in the ranked ballot system that we used in Burlington briefly. So it's hard to suggest really that people were struggling with this. And the confidence issue, what are we going to get in March for voter participation? 13% of eligible voters. In a high-flying November election, we'll get 60% maybe. So, 40% of people are not using the election system. I haven't asked them if they would rather use it if it was a ranked ballot, but it is pretty hard to argue that people are feeling very confident in our election system, or frankly, the nature of our government at every level. So there's a lot of ways to measure this. I think, unfortunately, it's tempting. It happens every kind of discussion we have about, well, what would happen to Bernie or what would have happened to Bob Kiss. We can't get away from that. It's actually smarter, I would argue, to look at principles like, shouldn't we have a system that elects somebody that the majority of voters support, like a majority principle, 50% plus one support. There you start to have, I would argue, some integrity in the system. 40% threshold that we have in Burlington is very arbitrary, kind of strange. So anyway, those are some random thoughts. I'm not aware of another system other than plurality system, a traditional runoff, or a ranked ballot, an instant runoff that is being used anywhere in this country for elections in different levels of government. So there are different systems. There are, around the world, there's a huge variety of systems. Many of them are better than the plurality system, I would argue. But this one is a good place to start the discussion, I think.
Any more comments out here?
I'm Alan Turnbull. I live in the here in the 6th. I'm really appreciative that you're introducing this because I think it's a topic that is really worth the state grappling with. I agree that there's no perfect system. I'm a big proponent of anything other than what we have, though, because I think the danger of having people elected to serve only potentially representing 40.1% of the voters is really not a good idea. That's just not a good idea. I want to know that whoever wins has some backing from a majority of the people. And what I see missing from IRV systems that I've seen is that on the one hand they don't sort of measure the intensity of support for people. You either, each vote is either a yes or a no. And so, like when we facilitate meetings with sticky dots on the wall, say there's 4 candidates, you give all the voters get 4 sticky dots and they can allocate them as they wish. And that helps show the intensity of support. And then on the other side is some way to measure the intensity of opposition. And that way, if everyone got a kill button, you'd always be able to see whether there's any candidate. You could set up a system in which no candidate that was displeasing to more than 50% of the people could accidentally appear to be the winner, if you get that meaning. And I've never seen that worked out in a system. But I appreciate that you're putting this to the legislature to think about. Thanks.
We just have a couple more minutes. So one thing I would love, Sandy, you mentioned this, is about if it comes to a runoff in a conventional sense, in the Australian ballot, you know who you're running, who you're voting for, you know who the candidate is in a runoff. At the same time, and Mary, maybe you could sympathize with me as someone who works at the polls, the idea of not having to hold an entirely new election to determine who the runoff candidates are, that's really attractive. So could you just, there's an efficiency piece in here that I think is really attractive, but I also want you to just expand on your idea about, you don't know who you're voting for in a runoff in this scheme.
I don't see really what's wrong at all with the current system. That's where I start with. If there's not a problem, there's nothing to fix, is there? And shouldn't we just appreciate that our voting system is not broken in Burlington? It might be broken at the statewide level. It might be broken at the federal level because of the Electoral College, actually. But it is not broken here. We've never had, and I think we did the history at the time, there's never been a mayoral runoff. Is there?
I don't believe so.
There has never been one. The argument was at the time that a traditional runoff would cost more money. We had never had one. Number one. So I don't understand why we can't keep the system as it is, 40%, unless if somebody gets 40%, then there's no runoff. Or if somebody doesn't, then have a real runoff. Because that way you know that that person ends up with 50%, the winner of a traditional runoff. I don't understand why the system is considered broken. I don't understand also why we couldn't merely do a plurality. So what? We'd have a mayor with less than 50%. You don't think they'd act as if they had it? We have that now.
Okay,
And look, he's a very effective mayor.
So I'd like to comment. I have been kept my mouth shut since my first presentation. First of all, we haven't had a runoff, but that's because we have a 40% margin. And we've had a lot of elections in which the mayor has gotten under 50% of the vote. Right. And like you, I would like it to be that a majority of the people have in one way or another blessed a candidate, that it's not 40%. And I think particularly, I think it was years ago, Paul Lafayette, Peter Brownell, and Peter Clavel when he was coming back. And Peter got just over 40% of the vote and won the election.
Which Peter?
Peter Clavel. But Clavel, Brown, who's to say what would have happened if we'd had a runoff at that point to see who got 50% of the vote? I would like to see that. And then the other issue is that you could do, I think is it Alabama that treats the primary election, the general election is basically just a primary in a sense, and the top 2 vote getters in a statewide race, then run off against each other. So you could have like 8 people running, and the 2 people who make it to the runoff have between them like 30% of the vote. And those are the only 2 people who make it to the runoff. That is not an appealing system to me. And if you want to have like 7 people running, which I think is great.
I do too.
But you want to have an election in which there is a blessing from the electorate on a majority of the people. You can't be doing, all right, 7 people run. Okay, now we have an election with 6 people run, now with 5, now with 4, now with 3, now with 2, and finally a winner. You just can't run an election like that. We'd be having town meeting day in March, and then the mayor would get elected in July. And we'd have busted
We
the
wouldn't have a
city
mayor at
budget.
all.
So that's really why I support IRV, to get someone with a majority vote, but have like 7 or 8 candidates running, and give the chance of third-party candidates to win.
Okay, thanks. Super quick comment from someone who hasn't shared yet. Yeah.
Hi, I'm Andy Simon. I live in Ward 5. I think our system is broken, and I don't think it's going to be fixed by IRV or by the system that is currently in place. And I think it's broken because so few people vote. And that really is what we should be concentrating on. I think that the tragedy is that we have elected officials who we're talking about 40% or 50%. We're talking about elected officials who are elected with 18% of the registered voters. Our current mayor, when he was reelected with 25%, 67%, that was touted, 67% of the vote. It was 67% of 25% of registered voters. He got 18% of registered voters. He was the mayor. And from that perspective, from that mathematical viewpoint, I think our system is totally broken.
Well, it's actually worse than that, because I think only about a slight majority of eligible voters register.
But you're
Yeah,
right.
you're right about
You're right
that.
that IRV does not fix that in any way, because that's one of the things we were promised. That it was this exciting new system, and it didn't turn out to be that way, because the turnout did not go up. In fact, it was lower than it was under the regular voting system. So do we want better turnout? Yeah, but better turnout is driven partly by exciting campaigns and candidates inspiring their voters, and that does not lead to that by IRV. It leads to homogenous vanilla type campaigns. Maybe there's a different system that does do that, but this one hasn't done it.
Wow. Okay, thank you very much for everyone who offered your opinions.